Hello, and welcome to the first Docomomo US video interview. I'm Liz Waytkus, Executive Director of Docomomo US, and I'm joined today by Victoria Young, Professor of Modern Architectural History and Chair of the Art History Department at the University of St. Thomas in St. Paul, Minnesota. She is also the recent author of the book, St. John's Abbey Church, Marcel Breuer and the Creation of Modern Sacred Space. Welcome, Victoria.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Glad to have you. Congratulations on the book. It just recently came out. Seems like you're getting a lot of press out there and going around the circuit.
Yep, trying to.
That's fantastic.
In all the important spots.
Great. Well, we're so happy to have you here in New York. We're being hosted today by the Center for Architecture. And we're going to just walk through some questions about your recent book.
Great.
Before we begin, I will say that it was a delightful coincidence because I don't think Docomomo US knew that your book was coming out at the exact time as our conference in Minnesota. So it was a delightful coincidence.
And for me too.
Which is wonderful for the upcoming symposium in June. So I think the best way to begin, if you want to, if there's a passage of the book, let's start with that.
That's a great way to start. It's a passage that comes really early on in the story that I've created. It's about Breuer being at the consecration ceremony. And, you know, for an architect, I think to be able to be in a building when it's completed, you know, it's kind of a natural thing, but to be in something that's actually consecrated and really in the minds of the Catholic users changes its complete existence in that Mass, I think that's a pretty special moment, and he felt that too. So this is just what I wrote about that. This powerful ritual deeply moved Breuer, who later remarked to Abbot Dvorak, "All I can say, Father Abbot, is that this is the first building I have designed and the first object I have designed, which has been made so sacred, or as you would say, consecrated to God." And that's the end of his quote. And for me, it was about these rites of dedication, ceremonially assigning the building to the sacred purpose of worship, dating back to the days of the early church. They provide an inherent contradiction to the modern nature of college-built buildings in form and theological underpinnings. Yet this very paradox, the modern and innovative versus traditional and historical, underlies the story of this church's creation, and it really does.
Oh, that's great. That's fantastic. I mean, it's visually so striking, but there hadn't been another book dedicated to the story of St. John's Abbey or the collection of the campus itself.
Yeah, there had been one short little volume done by Whitney Stoddard, who was actually a medieval art historian, and he was a friend of Breuer, so he did it at the time that Breuer gets the commission. And so it talks about the master plan more of the campus, and it only took the church up through the first design phase. And we had two design phases here. It gets a commission in 53, they do a model design, late 53, early 54, and there's no money, so they redesign 56, 57, and then build in 58. And Whitney had documented that early part, but kind of basically, so it was really, you know, a tale just waiting to be told. And it just worked out that I was able to grasp onto it. You know, I'm a Minnesota girl. I grew up on a farm in southern Minnesota. And so I'd known about this place. My sister had gone to camp here. And so I first encountered it when I was in my teens. But then I went out east, came out here, went to NYU and finished undergrad, and then went to the University of Virginia. And when it came time to look for a dissertation topic, I knew that this could probably work. It was about, you know, it was one of those things too, where there were all these anniversaries of the building, you know, 40 years, Breuer's anniversary of his birth and death. A lot of things really coalesced at the same time. And I thought, you know, gosh, people on the East Coast just don't know about this place, right? You've got all these Breuer buildings in town and down in DC where you've been living too. But let's tell them about this story.
Was there something that drove you to want to research Breuer in particular? Is it the sacred spaces of the Abbey themselves?
Yeah, it was the sacred space, because I'd written my master's thesis on a 19th century monastery in England, and became really interested in monks and how they use their space and how each order creates some kind of typical plan. And and so on. And so when this was a monastery, that for me was the linchpin. I mean, quite honestly, at that point when I made the decision to write on it, it could have been any architect. But it was Breuer, and thankfully so.
And it's such an incredible space to walk into, and from the outside and the inside, it doesn't seem like your typical traditional church on the inside. So I guess what are some of those unique characteristics that Breuer and some of the other designers brought to the Abbey?
And that's the whole thing. It was atypical, and it was meant to be so, because the monks were trying to establish themselves as the leaders of Benedictinism, and not only leaders in size and their kind of power after World War II, but also leaders of liturgical reform. So the building had to support a structure of worship that hadn't really been in use before, to a great extent in America, where you would have an open plan, right, no columns, get the altar in the center, let everybody come together around that. Have a lectern where people could say the word, where a lay person could do a reading instead of the priest doing it, and put the sacraments back in the ceremonial path. I mean, that was really crucial. And so Breuer's love of concrete and his ability to kind of shape space around any program with concrete came together really well here as well.
So I guess in thinking about Breuer, it was the Abbey was finished in 1961.
The church, yeah.
The church was finished in 61. So where was Breuer at this point in his career, and where did he go after the Abbey?
That's a really good question. So before this, he hadn't done a sacred space, which is interesting. And after this, he will do some sacred space. That stems directly out of this commission, from people he was working with on this commission that take him into that realm to some extent. But before this, some of the big projects that he worked on, some things here in New York, the big project was the UNESCO complex in Paris. And that was a tall, office building-like complex with this auditorium to the side of it. And that auditorium in form is exactly what the church becomes. So he had a vocabulary that would translate. And after this, things just kept going. I mean, he had a really successful practice until, he became ill in health in the late 70s and 80s, and did, a series of buildings down in Washington, ski resort in France. I mean, just all these things. It just kept moving for him.
So cool. It's so cool that it's there. Being on the East Coast.
And then you come there, right?
And then you come there and you drive up the highway, and it looks like someone looking at you. The bell tower, as you come up, I think one of my comments was it looked like a Eames drawing, or an Eames character.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's so cool. So for as much as I appreciate the building, you appreciate the building, what were some of those comments once it was completed?
She was problematic for a lot of people, as you can imagine. That bell banner out front was something people hadn't seen before. Where did that come from? Is that really something that allows us to transition from the profane into the sacred? What does that all mean? And just the form of the building itself, and it's massive concrete that's left raw and unadorned. That was troublesome. Even the local bishop of St. Cloud, who's the diocese of that region, was known to call the building an ecclesiastical garage. And when you watch the video of the consecration mass, I don't know, maybe it's me, but he just doesn't look happy the whole time he's doing the ceremony. So there were a lot of people who just, one, didn't believe that modernism or any kind of Bauhaus descendant could create a sacred space effectively. But then there was a lot of support for it as well. The monks were pretty careful about that. Number one, they always couched the building in terms of tradition. So like their medieval counterparts, engineering was the key, right? So you build a Gothic structure, that's an engineered building. You see it was different, right? We can't go back and really understand how people were taking in Saint-Denis or something at the time, but it's that kind of sensibility. And those engineering principles had to come through, but yet that was a very normal thing for them to do at this point, if they wanted to be the leaders of their faith.
And is there a sense that the monks and that this building is meant to last for hundreds of years, like the medieval churches of centuries ago.
Right, no, it's the same sensibility. This thing should be around for a long time and leave that same mark that the great Gothic cathedrals did, absolutely.
That's great. So to ask you a little bit about, so Docomomo US will be spending an entire day in June for our national symposium. We'll spend an entire day at St. John's Abbey. When you go in, what are the little nuggets that people really need to look for and not miss?
That's good. You've got to look at the details all around you all the time. You've got to look at the way that Breuer brings materials together, where wood meets concrete or meets bronze or meets marble or some other material, right? Those are so fascinating. I mean, there's down, and we'll get into the lower level of the church, which is usually kind of off limits for people, where all the private chapels are. And you've got to look at his altars, because he designed altars, sculptural objects in this space that were needed too. But even in the shrine to St. Peregrine down there, I finally spent some serious time in that just a few months ago when I was giving a tour out there. And I was amazed by how walls just miss each other by 1/4 of an inch in places I never thought that would happen. And it's just those moments, with really good modern design, those are the places you have to look. You can't look at the bigger thing and go, oh man, it's just a big concrete thing. Right? You have to look at the way pieces come together. That's the most important thing. And then the other one I'll say is in the science building. There's a wonderful little ramp from the projection booth in through to where the camera is. So there's a booth and a camera. And that whole thing just seems to float above your head. It's really fabulous.
Oh, neat. And there were, when I was up there in October, I didn't see, but I saw in your presentation last night that there are concrete trees.
Yes, in the library.
In the library.
Yes, go in the library. Those trees are huge, 27 feet on center.
Yeah.
And the library, all the buildings, this is the really great thing about St. John's, everything's almost pretty much original yet. The library's been trying to do some kind of renovation update, the 21st century library, but we still have some of the original furniture in that library. And so I'm curious to see how this is all going to work out when they actually do get to renovate and add on to it.
And the condition of the buildings is?
It's pretty good. It's pretty good. Concrete in Minnesota is kind of has a constant need, shall we say, right? So they're always working on it. They've got a capital campaign underway right now to redo some of the building spaces and renovate them a bit, but it's a struggle.
And so most of the buildings have not changed significantly in
50 years.
Yeah,
right.
60 years.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Right. Long time.
So my last question, it's always interesting, when we initially were talking about coming to Minnesota this year, the question of what's the architectural pilgrimage site in Minnesota? And for us in our conversation, it was the Abbey. Why do you think it's that special?
That's such a good question. And I'd say, number one, because we've got almost a complete set of Breuer buildings on site. The gymnasium and the student center designed by the firm don't get completed. But we have his only public sculpture, and then we have all these other building types there. We've got a library and science building and dorm space and a church. So there's just a lot of, you can get a Breuer really easily on that site. Otherwise, if you're out here in the East Coast, you'd have to go to 3 or 4 different cities to have a chance with that. So that's really important. And this mid-century modern concrete sculptural form is so good there. The builders, McGough Construction, and that whole team, just for them it was a game changer in their own lives. And I think those kind of projects are the special ones. When somebody comes back to you 50 years later and says, that changed our whole firm. That for me is really crucial. But the other thing I'll say is Hamilton Smith, who was one of the associates out of Breuer's office working on this project and one of the primaries, wrote this lovely little essay in a book we did about a decade now ago called St. John's at 150, celebrating their 150th anniversary. And in it he said he believes that the Abbey Church is Breuer's most complete building. And that's pretty special, coming from somebody who worked in the middle of all that. Right there.
Right by his side.
Yeah, exactly. That's the one. They look back on their careers. That's the one that was their special moment.
I can't wait to go back.
Can't wait to have you all in Minnesota.
Yeah. Well, thanks so much for sitting down and talking with us. And we will see you in June. up at the Abbey.
Yep, good, thank you.
Thanks, Victoria.